What up, friends? The future is mine, and today we're going to be reviewing Bastille's newest album, Give Me the Future. This is the fourth album overall by the British indie pop band Bastille. It comes 3 years after their previous record, Doom Days, which I consider to be an unfortunate misstep in their career. Bastille have always kind of been derivative of bands like Coldplay, but Doom Days especially was just the epitome of bland and lifeless pop music with little to no substance. Because of this, I was a little worried going into this new project by them, but this might be my hot take of 2022. I actually kind of like this album, guys. I have to say, the lead single, Distorted Lightbeam, is a pretty good first impression for the album. Instrumentally, this is far different than anything that the band has tried before, but for the better. There's a great opener in the simple beat and anthemic vocals before we get into a sort of synthpop and synthwave banger during the chorus. Fun flow, elegant string, and synth segments alongside some quirky vocal manipulation. This is much more layered and dynamic compared to a lot of their career, actually. That orchestral outro backed by the electronic beat and even a talk box segment, it's just too much fun. Lyrically, it starts the overarching theme of the project, living in a digitized future, essentially, and how people tend to turn to TV shows, music, and video games as a form of escapism to get away from their hectic everyday life. After this, though, the next two songs are really the only moments where I'm just not a fan of anything about them. Thelma and Luis sounds like they tried to recapture the sound that they played with on Wild World, but also combine it with this new album sound, and ends up just feeling really awkward and disjointed. The bass-driven instrumental is fairly unique, but it doesn't fit this album's aesthetic at all. The vocals and instrumentals also feel strangely disconnected from each other, and the lyrical themes also have little to nothing to do with the actual overarching themes of the project. No Bad Days, on the other hand, is just odd in general. It's a simplistic and dark-sounding instrumental, but it doesn't go anywhere. The repetitive, well, fuck 'em line is just corny, and it really takes me out of the more somber headspace that this track is trying to sort of envision you in. And it just kind of ruins the track overall for me, actually. The beat largely doesn't even get interesting until the piano segment that comes in after the final third of the track, and then it just goes right back to being boring. I understand that the lyrics and song in general are kind of an ode to Dan's aunt who died back in 2019. However, I really don't think this song had the emotional impact that he was intending it to have. Back to the Future is kind of what Thelma and Louise was trying to do, but better. There's a much more seamless integration of the guitar, beat, and just general quirkiness on here. The vocal patterns are pleasant, and the bass is punchy, having a good presence to it. Fun little brass flourishes and grooves are abound across this entire song, and the chorus does a great job in sort of melding all of these elements together. I also really love that sort of Daft Punk-esque bridge, just giving the track even more variety. The lyrics consist of comparisons to Back to the Future and Our Modern World, alongside other references like 1984 and Blade Runner. I can appreciate where Dan's coming from on these, but honestly, they are not delved into nearly enough to get any other reaction other than, I understood that. So that was pretty unfortunate. Plug In is probably the most in-depth look that we'll get at this album's social commentary, and to be fair, I do quite like this track. I do like how the first verse is fairly simplistic with its beat, but Dan's vocals tend to be more fast-paced in comparison. The chorus is also dark and ominous, but manages to convey that over a dance beat too, which I thought was pretty interesting. The song also goes full-on dark electro from the final chorus to the outro, giving it a very dramatic sense of progression that I enjoy. Like I said, this song is probably one of the best lyrically on the album just because Dan actually tries to go in depth on all of these issues that he's talking about, like AI, wealth inequality, being over-reliant on technology, and how technology can impact people's relationships with each other. Shut Off the Lights starts out as something quite simplistic, but soon grows into something greater. To me, this sound is what they tried but failed to capture on Doom Days, just done a lot better. After the simple guitar intro, we get a very tender and lush synthpop and synthwave instrumental that soars to some pretty great heights as the chorus rolls around. That chorus in general is just really fun, and the song has a warmness to it that does match the lyrical topics of how, again, technology impacts the relationships between others and not just the society at large, in a sense. That sax outro is also a pretty welcome moment to capture this sort of sense of humanity in a digitized world. Stay Awake kind of has a sort of new wave sound to it, with guitars and synths working in harmony over a pulsating bass and beat. The acapella opener leads into the main instrumental pretty well, especially as Dan takes a sort of melancholic approach in trying to find something that can tie him to the real physical world, especially as he exclaims, "Now us freaks and geeks can rule the world, have everything, doesn't matter if it's real." It's not the best wordplay or anything like that, but I do think it's a pretty interesting concept, exploring how as VR gets more advanced, we have to find more and more things that draw us to the real world as opposed to the world where we can kind of create anything that we want in VR. The title track, Give Me the Future, is a pretty strong one, I think, starting out very simple and skeletal, but elevating itself as it progresses. It never gets too much higher, though, sounding pretty dire throughout most of its runtime, which does help it stand out from the rest of the track, which tended to be pretty upbeat. Subtle guitar picking, synths, and sound effects add to the texture of the track, making a more low-key song actually have some nice presence to it, and flavor as well. That post-chorus is particularly tasty, especially as it leads into the very elegant string-driven bridge. It also fits coming off of the last song lyrically, as it largely deals with having technology integrated into every facet of our lives might have some unintended consequences. Fitting to its name, Club 57 is essentially a club banger with a whistle and acoustic guitar focused beat. It oddly sounds like a mix between Coldplay and like Pet Shop Boys, but strangely enough, I don't hate it. It's quirky and weird, but it does fit the album's overall pacing and sound, and I do think the vocal performances on this album were a particular highlight in comparison to some of the other songs. The chorus is catchy as hell and does a pretty good job in capturing both the good and bad of the club scene. That bridge is pretty slick, and the vocal inflection, some might hate them, but I think it's a pretty unique aesthetic, to be honest. I think they're pretty fun. I gotta say, though, the album does end on a pretty weak note with Future Holds. The track's decently composed, and I do like the focus on the choir-like background vocals, but the lyrical sentiment on this one is just odd. After all the problems that Dan talked about on this project, he basically ends the album by saying, "It don't matter if I got you," which is just a sort of odd acceptance of the world as it is. It's very anticlimactic. I wish he would have, summed up his thoughts on technology, or maybe even tried to provide some solutions, but as it is right now, it just feels like a cop-out. I think the instrumental does save it a bit, but the album could have ended a lot stronger. There are also the interlude tracks and Promises that I also didn't talk about. These don't really stand out on their own, but they do tend to fit into their places on the record. I'm not a huge fan of intermission tracks to begin with, but I think these were done pretty innocently enough. You know, for Bastille, this was a pretty ambitious album. They're taking a sound that they've never done before, and also talking about a topic that has an insane amount of nuance and detail to describe properly. At certain points, I totally admit they probably were in way over their heads. However, I do gotta say that I personally think they nailed the instrumentation aspect of this record overall. I was impressed by how many different synthpop and dance pop sounds they were able to cram into this thing while also making each track sound distinct, and they also didn't tend to fall into the typical mainstream pop traps from what I found. The songs tended to be lush and vibrant, but where they really falter is the lyrics. I can appreciate where Dan is coming from with a lot of them, however, they're far too simple to cover the insane amount of nuance and detail that you need to properly delve into these topics. Like, how are you going to explain the harmful effects of fucking NFTs in the metaverse on a 3-minute pop tune? Like, it's impossible unless you make a whole album dedicated to that one topic alone. In fact, I think that's what they should have done. They should have gone all in on AI, the metaverse, technology's impacts on relationships, you name it. Then they would have been able to spread that nuance throughout all the songs on the album. It also would make the album lyrically feel more complete, whole, and concise as well. I end up finding this album to be kind of like new wave projects, similar to early New Order. In New Order's case, Bernard's not the best lyricist, but what the band excels at is creating fantastic instrumentals and using Bernard's lyrics and vocals as highlight pieces. The difference is that New Order tends to talk about love and relationships, which can much easily be covered over the 3-minute pop tune runtime. Even though I think Bastille did a great job with their instrumentals on this project, they chose a far too ambitious topic to be covered in this format. But you know, after all of that, I do love the instrumentals. I do at least like where Bastille is coming from in terms of lyrics, so I'm feeling a light 7, I guess. I do enjoy it, it's just when you delve deeper you can see its flaws. Of course, we do have to talk about album covers on this show, and this one I'm kind of torn on. I do like the concept, again, like the lyrics. And I think the idea of this sort of digitized computerscape going into a center, kind of like 2001: A Space Odyssey, can end up working. However, it ends up feeling kind of like those techno levels on Shadow the Hedgehog, where it's just too much visually, if that makes sense. I think the idea is good, but they should have simplified it a bit more to make it a bit more artsy. But of course, those are just my thoughts on this new Bastille album. What do you guys think? Did you think this was a pretty ambitious project and you liked where they were coming from, or did it just fail on all fronts? Let me know. Be sure to like, comment, subscribe, ring the bell if you also want to be part of my future. And until the next one, farewell.